Hi, everybody. Welcome to Girl Woman with Lara Rathod. In today's episode, I am talking to Sameen Affaf on being 30-something. Sameen, welcome to the series and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lara. So happy to be here with you always. You're just such a light, and it's an honor for me.
I am so excited. And after we introduce you, or you introduce you, we'll tell people how we connected, which kind of sets the scene a little bit as well. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, so my name is Sameen Affaf. My pronouns are she and her. I am a Muslim Pakistani woman. I am an immigrant and the daughter of immigrants. So I was born in Pakistan, and I was raised in Toronto, Canada, also known as Toronto, Canada. And I've been living here in the United States in Orlando, Florida, which is, I'd like to acknowledge that this is the land of the Seminole tribe of Florida as well. So yes, I've been here for the last couple of years, and I am a straight woman as well.
Thank you so much. So to tell everybody how we connected through the magical world that is social media, where I stumbled onto Sameen's writing on Instagram. I have no idea how, but like through a beautiful, beautiful synchronicity and good fortune,
Yes.
Somebody had shared your work. And I'm very particular, especially being a creator myself, I'm very particular that when I share other people's work, I try and track back to the original source rather than just resharing from the place that I found it. And so I tracked back and I found you and tagged you, and then that started our kind of communication, our conversation, and through that we kind of became friends. And when I came up with this, I really, really wanted to interview you.
And I'm so glad. And I always believe it's like divine connection, right? When you just happen to connect with someone and connect with someone so personally, so quickly.
Yes.
Also.
Yes. You hold the record for the longest pre-call because it was the first time that we'd actually spoken on video. And so it was so funny to me because it honestly did not feel like I was talking to a stranger. And I was
not at all
discombobulated by that. I was like, how can this be? But a part of me felt that even from exchanging DMs, I kind of just felt that there was a connection.
Me too. I'm so glad. I'm so glad that that feeling was mutual because I felt it immediately.
And you can always tell, right? Like when something is mutual. I think sometimes in life, like we overcomplicate things. We kind of like know that something might not feel right, but then we rationalize, we use our logical brain, and we try and tell ourselves things that, make us give things more of a chance, etc., etc. And I'm not saying that that's wrong in the situation, because context of all of these things is important. But when you feel it, when you feel that something, magic, connection, whatever you want to call it, it's undeniable, and both people feel it at the same time. Like one person doesn't feel it if the other person doesn't feel it.
Absolutely. And I really believe that intuitive gut feeling is always there. And I truly believe what you said about we make things complicated. When it's easy, it's easy. And I believe in being in the flow and, listening to those signs of just things being right. So I'm so happy this was right.
Me too. And Eid Mubarak, because we're
We're
filming on Eid.
Yes. It was a little bit of a rush this morning, trying to celebrate, and at the same time, but I wouldn't have it any other way than being here with you. It's a great way to celebrate for me.
Yeah, it's really again synchronous that this has happened on Eid, because we were supposed to film last week, and then look at this it's divine.
Exactly. And actually when we rescheduled, I hadn't even realized that today would be Eid. So it worked out perfectly.
Okay, so Sameen, what 4 words would you use to describe yourself?
This one is so tricky, right? Because I think as women, we have this trouble with defining ourselves often or saying good things about ourselves. And I think on any given day, this would change for me. But today, you asking me, I would say one word would be evolving. So I think I recognize that I'm in this constant state of transformation. And I'm never the same person in any given day or any given moment. And that's okay. It's okay to be evolving. It's okay to transform. That's how we should be. I would say empathetic. Empathy is really important to me. The ability to feel for other people, to feel our own feelings, and hold those and honor those as sacred is very important to me. So I hope that's something I would always strive to be, is empathetic and connected to others. Intuitive. I really pride myself on going with a gut feeling, with following that sign that overcomes me of, this is right, just like how we were talking about with our connection. And of course, being intuitive and being aligned with your intuition is not always easy in a world of distraction and other voices, but something I always strive to maintain. And then I guess I would say open. I'd hope to be open, open-minded, open-hearted, open to others, open to opportunity and change in my life, not following a set path of what I think life should be, but allowing that, life to unfold as it's supposed to. I think that's when we realize most beautiful, the most beautiful things come to us that way. So, and if I had a fifth word, I would say radical, just because.
just because. I mean, it's radical to like allow yourself a fifth word, and I love it. So yes, that's great.
I love it. Yeah, I would say definitely, in my sort of orientation towards things, striving for a radical world that's different in so many ways from the one that we are currently experiencing.
We need radical change because the world that we're currently experiencing does not serve anybody, even the people that it ostensibly claims to
absolutely
help.
Yes,
right.
Even those that benefit and privilege at this temporary juncture, we're all being harmed at a very deep and spiritual level, I believe. So radical change is definitely needed.
I believe that completely, and I love your words. I share your words as well, and the words that you've used are very relationship focused, relationship with self and connection to other people, and expansive. And I think that as we continue this conversation, I think that a lot of the themes that you've already highlighted at the beginning will come through in our discussion.
Right.
So how does it feel being 30 something?
Oh my goodness. It feels really good. If you had asked me, I think a year ago, I would have said, oh no, like, I don't know how I feel about this stage, because it was interesting. I think in my late 20s, I got to a point where I felt very good and like solid in terms of the footing of who I was. I was like, yes, I know who I am. I'm set in my career, relationship wise, I feel great. And then life has this funny way. I always think of it as being very circular, right? We go through these seasons of when we think we're at the top, nothing lasts forever. And, there's a period of growth that has to occur when you're sort of, brought back down again. And so that happened shortly after. And I started to think like, oh my goodness, how could I be in my 30s now and feel so unsure of who I am? Whereas a couple years ago, I felt great and settled. And I would listen to, my cousins and my friends would be like, yeah, 30s is great because I just feel like I have this sense of who I am and this sense of identity. And then I was like, oh my goodness, but I don't feel that way right now. But if you ask me today, having gone through this period of, again, with my word, evolution over the last couple of years, I would say I feel really good. I feel really like I even have a stronger sense of who I thought I was, even an even better sense of who I am today.
That's so interesting. Well, I mean, it's interesting for me on many levels. Firstly, the fact that you felt grounded in your 20s. I think that is unusual, because I've heard a lot of people talk about the 20s as this time of, starting to adultify and do the things that, prove that you're an adult, right? You to show up to a job, you get paid for your work, that kind of thing. And so it's more about doing and kind of adultifying, right? And then, so the fact that you actually started to feel very grounded, I think is unique, and I think it's exciting. And I think knowing what I know about the kind of work that you were doing and the way that you approach that work, I think it's very telling. And I think that as we eventually start talking about, you know, work and job and career and how those words sort of intersect and what they mean for us, I think picking the right work for you and the right career and the right job helps you self-actualize earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you also picked up on, well, then you went through this period of, you know, growth and change and evolution again. And it sort of made me think a little bit that, like, when we feel grounded, like when we feel kind of, this is what I know, I feel good in it, it's because we've got used to the context that we're in. So we're comfortable in that context. And there's nothing wrong with being comfortable. I'm not saying that people have to blow up their lives and challenge themselves, you know, to push themselves out.
Yes.
But when life kind of throws you into change, and a lot of change sometimes, you know, with life is very unexpected, very sudden, very blindsiding. When life kind of puts you in that, then it's like you're on a roller coaster, right? And you're
Absolutely.
like, oh my God, like I'm holding on for dear life. But then when you do the upswing, of the cyclical, like ups and downs, right? I feel that, like, you go down, that's where life like throws you. And then when you're on the upswing, you're propelled by the knowledge and the wisdom and the experience and the turbulence and the breaking open that you have experienced in that down cycle, to then it's now part of you, like it's like a cape or a backpack or whatever, or it's inside you as you're on the upswing.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think that's the key there too, right? Just this feeling of, as soon as I figure out who I am, I realize I don't know myself at all, right? And being propelled that way is just such a beautiful thing, because once you get through that downswing, you realize what was needed, and you realize, you know, that perhaps there were certain wounds that you have that you never even knew were there, or, you know, certain parts of you that needed to be addressed. And I think, you know, what you mentioned, the thing about my 20s was I was following the expectations that were set for me, you know, by society at large, by the culture I was in. You know, I went to school. I was very fortunate to be able to, you know, get a post-secondary education, to get my master's. And that was this feeling of achievement, like, oh, I'm doing exactly what's expected of me, and I'm doing it well. And, you know, I was always raised, you know, with this idea of like, yes, you gotta, you know, do well. That's sort of that immigrant.
Yes.
Of course, you know, that immigrant survival mechanism of, you know, go to school, get a good education. That will allow you to get a good career, to be able to be financially set. And so, you know, I was doing well in school. I always felt like I knew what the next step was, right? Because it was one after the other. And then it was like, okay, now I can get a job. And I did that, right? I was able to get a job in teaching. And there's a very clear trajectory of how that would go. And I was like, okay, everything's clear, everything's outlined. And then when I, you know, met my partner and my husband, and we decided, all right, like, we're gonna get married. He lived here in Orlando. And so I never thought about moving, never thought about leaving my family, Toronto, everything that I had worked for. But it was worth it. And I decided I would move here to live with him. And then I recognized, like, oh, you know, who am I without this clear trajectory of, you know, where I'm going? And so being in a position where I had to recalibrate, you know, learn my environment, learn what it meant to be living here, away from my family, away from my friends. You know, this position of like, okay, I'll have to start a career from scratch. Do I want to be teaching? Do I want to be doing something else? And of course, then navigating marriage and being newly married, which was a completely different role, and trying to figure out what that meant for me. So it made sense that, yeah, you know, without that sort of outline, without those steps in front of me of 1, 2, 3, this is what you're supposed to do. Figuring out who I was outside of those, outside of what I did and what I achieved. So who was I? you know, and that was a very important question, and a very one that I've spent the last couple of years really asking myself.
I could not love you sharing that more, because I think it's a question that nobody teaches us to question. Nobody teaches us that the greatest relationship we're ever going to have is the relationship with ourselves. Nobody teaches us that life is a process of figuring out who you are and then doing your very best to make conscious choices to live in alignment and authenticity with who you are. You know, I certainly wasn't taught any of these things. I, you know, very much like you know, came from parents who had immigrated into the UK. I was born in the UK, so I'm first generation. But you know, it's the mindset, the exact mindset that you spoke about, of do well in school, get a job, have security and stability. And I did all of those things. And the thing is that even in the doing of all of those things, I really wasn't that happy. I was happy when I was following the path, you know, GCSEs tick, A levels tick, university tick, law school tick, training contract tick, qualification tick. You know, I knew that especially, it's funny when you say that, you know, your path was sort of clearly defined, like what you need to do to become a teacher, and mine as a, you know, to become a lawyer was also clearly defined. So I didn't have to do what some other people who had done different degrees, who then had to, when they came out of university, early 20s, figure out, okay, what job do I want? For me, my path was really determined. It was predetermined. You know, I got summer schemes where you get a chance when you're at university to work in different law firms. As a result of working in one of them, I actually got my training contract without being interviewed. Of course, they didn't tell me that, so I still had to do the application and then wait patiently.
Right.
But you know, like I kind of felt, you know, not fell into, because I had to work for it, but you know, I followed this path, and then I ended up qualifying, and I ended up, you know, being a trainee and then qualifying. And I just remember feeling a bit discombobulated, going, oh, is this it? Because it had been sold, being an adult and getting to this point had been sold to me that it was this great achievement that would then give me the freedom. And I felt like, when you think about freedom, I felt I knew the feeling deep inside that I thought I was supposed to have, and I didn't have it. And your questioning started early 30s. My questioning, I suppose I do myself a disservice by saying I really only questioned in my 40s, because I think I was always questioning, but I was not strong enough to actually really delve and get the answer. And so your period of change in the last 2-3 years of really examining, who am I without my career? Who am I when I've moved to a new place and I don't, you know, I don't have my kind of structures around me, and I don't have all the friends and the sort of the established kind of, this is what I do at the weekend, and you know, that kind of thing. And who am I now? Suddenly I can't work for a little bit. So what does that make me? You know, because in our capitalist society, rest is not valued the way it needs to be, right? So then you feel guilty. Like even when you're resting, you feel guilty because you're not being productive, and because we all measure ourselves by what we do, rather than measuring ourselves by the feeling of being and being okay with being.
Oh my goodness, Lara, yes, everything that you're saying right now. And there's a couple things. It's interesting, you know, you sort of organically came to this realization, like, hey, this is not right. You know, after being in this career, having achieved it, doing so well, right, as the head of legal, and getting to this position where you had all this outside validation, but yet it didn't feel right, right? And for me, it was interesting. I never saw myself as a teacher. So there was this sort of lack of clarity in terms. I did my when I was in my undergrad, I decided, much to my parents' sort of like questioning. Of course, I come from a family of doctors, which is very stereotypical. But I decided that I wanted to do my, you know, major in political science. I wanted to specialize in crime law and deviance. even going in, I hadn't realized that. I knew I was sort of just interested in studying society, how it worked. And so I sort of just found my way as I flowed through. And I was very lucky that my parents were accepting of that, that they were like, okay, that's great. This is something that you're interested in, study it. And, you know, eventually I sort of was led to teaching in sort of, you know, again, following my intuition, my gut there. But it, you know, it wasn't until I was forced out of my comfort zone, you know, because of getting married, I had to move, that I was like, okay, just like how you mentioned that sometimes life just throws something at you. I probably would have been comfortable following, you know, that same path, because it was the outside validation of every achievement that fed me, right? It was like, okay, I did well on this. I'm gonna, you know, and it made me feel good, honestly.
Yeah.
And then what you mentioned about feeling, you know, when you are forced to rest, or you're forced, especially, you know, as women, typically, you know, and as a Pakistani woman who, you know, there's this role that you could be domesticated and be, you know, at home and taking care of your children. And then there's this other side that was always like, no, I'm gonna have a career. But there was this shame, this deep shame that I experienced after moving and being like, who am I if I'm not contributing financially to my household? Who am I if I'm not laboring, you know, for someone else? You know, what do I say when people ask me like, oh, what are you doing these days? Because that's always the question.
That's always the question.
That's always the question. What do you do? What, you know, and, you know, people would ask me, like family members would ask me, or, you know, so what do you do all day? You know, because since you're not working, what do you do? And that was like the question I still dread to this day, because not only am I defined by it, yes, but
even though I know it's the most uninteresting question to ask, like I know this, I still find myself when I meet new people, I still ask that question, and I'm like, God, Lara, like think of another question, because actually that question, you know, in answering, like you said, I would always sort of, when I met new people, I would be like, oh, I've decided to take time off from my career. I've actually decided to leave my career, you know, like whatever period, because I've taken some breaks, and some of the breaks were because I was like super burnt out and I had nothing to give. And another break was like after losing my cousin, I was in such intense grief that I sort of labored and I pushed through as much as I could. And then I came to a point where I was like, man, I need to like get my joy back, because I felt so devoid of joy that I knew that I needed to take a break to be able to rediscover life and to feel like I was being rather than just hanging on by a thread.
Absolutely.
And so going back to the question, who am I think that what we're both realizing, or realized and realizing from the last 3 years, is that who am I is who we are at our core, at our essence. Like, without, forget the roles, who am I has nothing to do with the roles that you do. It's our values, it's our soul, it's our spirit, it's being able to stand in power, like in groundedness.
I was just about to say that, yes, in our power. Absolutely.
And that's something that, gosh, you got to really rumble, as Brené Brown calls it. You got to do the rumble and really wrestle with all of the conditioning and the preconceptions, and be okay with resting and learning and living to be able to come through to answer that question.
Yes. And I had so much resistance, you know, because I kept having that voice in my head that was saying, again, you got to be showing, it was all about, again, the outside gaze. You know, you have to be showing that you're productive, that you're doing something meaningful, you know, but meaningful was tied to bringing in income. And, you know, it took a long time it was this process of, and it's continuous, but of shedding these layers of who I am not, You know,
Yeah.
it wasn't so much of becoming who I am. I am what I am. You know, we
Yeah.
are at our very core, the essence of our being. You know, we're talking about, you know, women using their voice and standing in their power. It's about letting go of all those layers of what we're not to be
Yes.
who we are,
To
and
reclaim, isn't it?
to reclaim.
It's the unshackling, the unlearning, the returning to self.
The returning, the remembering, because
Yes.
we know who we are, you know, we know what we want out of our lives. We know what brings us joy, and we betray ourselves so often, you know, in trying to meet the expectations of others. And you know, of course, we living in a patriarchal society, there's these expectations of what a woman is supposed to be, you know, how we're supposed to contribute to our society, our family, who we're supposed to be for everyone else, except for ourselves. And I think when I finally recognized that this period of not working for someone else, of being able to actually like separate myself from the capitalist system that, you know, is completely soulless and keeps you from really being able to reflect, that this was such a period, this was a blessing of not having to work. And here I was struggling, you know, being like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, not recognizing that this period was what I needed.
Because then when you're in resistance as well, I mean, it's just so ridiculous. I spent so I haven't worked formally for, you know, one employer in 3.5 years. I've done like little bits of things, but I haven't, you know, brought in that regular income.
Same amount of time too.
You know, this is clearly meant to be. And what I've realized now, like, because sometimes things make sense in hindsight, right? Like when you can look back, you can then join up the dots and you can see what led to what and what period of growth and what your thinking was as a whole, with perspective rather than being in it, right? It's like meditation has allowed me to like be an observer of my life. And now, you know, being 3.5 years in rather than, you know, year 1 or year 2, I can now see that the first 2 years I was like, I guess, in a state of agitation. I needed my nervous system to settle because I had been in this state of agitation for 43 years. So I was used to operating from that kind of that space of kind of, I don't know, hustling and being agitated, like having to adrenaline and push through and, you know, survive and keep fighting. And I ended up like fighting myself. Right? I couldn't open my computer to like do my career change course. I couldn't open my computer. I just felt it inside. I didn't want to. And I beat myself up about it. I kept beating myself up about everything that I wasn't doing. I would I still also followed joy. So thank God I did that, because that joy, you know, doing acting classes and working with children, which led to other beautiful opportunities and then fostered my creativity too. So I was pursuing that. But at the same time that I was pursuing that, I was also fighting and thinking things like, oh, maybe you're lazy. Now, I have never called myself lazy in my entire life until that time. And why was I calling myself lazy? Because I didn't feel like doing what I thought I should be doing and what other people expected me to do.
Yes.
And now I realize that calling yourself lazy, that's a word that a lot of women, we call ourselves, but actually it's not the truth at all. And that when you're feeling that you don't want to do something, it's about paying attention to that feeling and then digging underneath to go, oh, I'm feeling this, I'm noticing this. I wonder why. I wonder what this is telling me. I wonder what I'm not seeing yet. And then doing the work, like putting our energy into trying to uncover the truth, which will then help us, you know, move forward.
Yes. And that voice of, oh, you're being lazy is not your voice, right?
No.
And we know that. And that's exactly what it is. It's this constant
feels like your voice. Because it's all you hear. You don't even have to say the words. It's all I would hear. And then just like it would just then inhabit my body, and then I would feel terrible about myself, like low energy,
Yes. And the physical symptoms I experienced very early on, and I didn't even recognize them as this subconscious, again, resistance and agitation, like you described, that I was experiencing of just not being settled in myself. But my skin, shortly after I moved, shortly after I got married, and this is the time where I was supposed to be feeling great and, so beautiful about myself. Yeah. And Lara, my skin completely broke out. I could tell my system was completely unbalanced. And this was very early, even at a subconscious level, but just being taken out of my comfort zone. And I remember my husband mentioning to me, before we got married, he's like, there might be this period of like adjustment where this will be a big change for you. And I was like, no, I got this. I'll be fine.
I'm an achiever. I can make lemonade out of lemons. Like, I'm great. Right? Not that moving is a lemon, but you know what I mean. Like, I can produce. I can create.
Absolutely. And even at a very superficial, I was very happy. I was so enthralled with just being a newlywed, being in a new place. Everything was new. That I didn't even realize slowly that these voices of, all right, so like, what are you going to do with yourself? What are you going to become? What are you going to, and I didn't realize, we talk about like the voices that aren't ours. Like, I even would question like, okay, what if my husband, like, what if he thinks like I'm lazy and I'm
because then we project. Anything? Right?
And we project, and he never had said anything to make me feel this way, or that I was, I thought like, okay, if I don't have children right now, and I'm, that would be an excuse, right? Like, I'd be so occupied with like
that's the worthy
raising children.
Yes,
exactly. Because if a woman is not, that's an adequate excuse for society to say like, if she's at home, oh, but she has children, she's raising her children,
or she's pregnant and she's like pregnant, finding it hard, but that's acceptable because acceptable.
Right. And so then here I was like, okay, I'm gonna just try. I put my energy into being like, okay, what does the perfect wife look like? Like, what does it mean to have my home in order, to be this gourmet chef all of a sudden, to be doing all these things, to be available to my partner, And so again, it became about like, how will my husband see me? How will others see me? And slowly but surely that takes a toll, of course.
Because what we're actually talking about here is self-worth, right?
Yeah.
It's the most important thing that supports us in our life is, building a relationship with ourselves and creating self-worth and self-trust. But I guess maybe this is the way society is set up, and we'll talk about this in part 2 probably in more detail, but I feel like we are taught by society, by culture, by family, by all of the systems that influence us, to look for our worth outside of ourselves, to look for our worth in the roles and in the titles and in the money and in the house and in all of the external stuff, rather than our inherent worth of being a human who is open to learning and growing and evolving. And so when you take that human element of like looking for your worth, which we have both kind of rumbled with, because we haven't had the external metrics, right? In the last in the last sort of few years. But then you put on being a creator, and you and I spoke about this a lot in our pre-call, because it was like, when you're a creator, the systems that allow you to create, while they're wonderful, like, I'm very happy that I have an iPhone, I'm very happy that I have social media, I'm very happy that there's YouTube, because it allows me to share myself and other people with the world. But the way the systems are set up, and the way that the social media channels are set up, is that they value followers and they reward followers. And now it's got to the point that I think that people don't even, it's not that they don't take you seriously, but what's the word, not take you seriously, but they don't
they're very quick to dismiss
if you don't have the huge numbers of following, regardless of the fact that, like, I read an article that people with like massive followings, like sometimes up to 48%, like well-known people, I'm not going to name them, but well-known people, you know, 48% are bots and are fake, and because of the following it's so big, you know. And then you see like accounts with cats or whatever have like, you know, millions of followings. And so let's talk a little bit about this, because I think that this is something I've had to rumble with a lot, because I've had to sort of work out what my intention is behind creating. And Oprah talks about intention all the time. This revolutionized her life when she learned, I think from Gary Zukav, that she had to look at her intention, and then she brought her intention into everything she did with her show and OWN and all of the other projects that she does. And so when I first released my first series, Red Sofa Conversations, I mean, it was the first thing that I had done which felt like me. Like it was me putting me into the world, right? Because as a lawyer, I didn't feel like me. I would apologize for being a lawyer. Like I would kind of go, oh yeah, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not that kind of lawyer. Right. And also because I felt so disconnected that, you know, what other people's perceptions of what being a lawyer was did not match the reality of my experience. So they were like, oh my God, you're a lawyer? And inside I was like, oh my God, this is just awful. Right. So, but Red Sofa was so exciting because it was like me putting me out, and it just embodied my mindset, because the mission was that, you know, I wanted to sort of examine and delve into topics that connect us as human beings to show that we're more alike than we are different. Yeah. And so that mindset came from being a third culture kid and, you know, being exposed to different cultures and everything. But what I found when I put that out was that I expected, because it was the first thing that I had kind of produced since I'd stopped working, I expected that everybody would like, you know, watch it and share it, and then like lots of people would like find out about it and whatever. And because people have busy lives and they are doing other things, some people watched, you know, the first episode, like key people watched the first episode, but like after a while, like it wasn't something that sort of happened regularly. And then, you know, I felt like we're really bad at some points, and I was like, oh wow, this isn't feeling like I thought it would. And so I then had to examine very early, okay, this isn't feeling like I thought it would. Why? Why is because I wanted other people to validate me. I wanted other people to like it, because in my mind, external validation was how you got your worth, how it proved you were worthy. And again.
Yeah, sorry. Like, no, again, exactly.
And then I came to the point, and I'm really glad I came to this point in my first series, where I had to ask myself, okay, so this isn't feeling good, that, you know, people that you hoped would watch it, or the amount of people, you know, that would watch it, and it hasn't happened. So what does that mean? Are you going to stop creating? And I realized, no, I wasn't. And that, thank God I made that decision, because, you know, then I've created, you know, 6 other series, like this is the 7th one. And yes, of course I want people to watch and whatever, but nah, like it's hard, and it's not like I sorted it and I was kind of like, okay, that's great, and I don't care. Because I still care, but every time I feel that the balance, I'm caring too much, I have to look inward again and go, Lara, what's your intention?
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. And intention is so important. Actually, it's one of my recent posts that I wrote about was on intention as well.
I know, I shared it.
Oh, did you? I love that. In everything. It completely changes the energetic frequency behind what you're trying to create, and the result as well. And when are you creating from this space of love, you know, for what you are doing, and because you feel within you that this is what you're being called to do? Or is it from this space of fear? And that fear shows up in so many ways, right? A need of, you know, a desperation, you know, of like, oh, you know, and that's the thing about intention is, it, like you mentioned, it constantly has to be checked, reflected on, rechecked. And I'm talking from a moment to moment basis. And I do it even with anytime I'm about to share something, to write something, to create something. I have to ask myself, Sameen, why? Like, what is the reason behind you wanting to write this, or you wanting to share it? Because that's the other thing too, right? Usually we create, you know, before I even started sharing my work, I was writing, you know, for myself. I got to this point where it was just a form of release for me. And
Did
then
you start writing when you moved to Florida, or had you always been writing?
So I've always been a writer. Since I was a kid, I was a writer. You know, I wrote for the school paper. I love to write. But I hadn't written, because I was in academia for so long, I had written always for an audience, never for myself. And so just taking the time, it started with poetry, and just sort of, you know, writing poetry for myself. And it got to a point where, and we can talk about this more, but you know, I've always had a social justice orientation. That's always been on the foundation of my work. But it got to a point, especially, which I think was a turning point for so many after George Floyd was murdered, where I really felt like I had to show up in my voice, and there was no question about that. And this was the easiest way for me to do it as somebody who didn't have a traditional workspace or a traditional platform. Of course, social media was the way to sort of share something. It's a great way to have your message be shared and spread, but
and then to attract people that align with that. I mean, and then the people that challenge it. But
exactly, you know, but yes, I mean, it's beautiful in that sense. I mean, it allowed us to connect, which is amazing. And you know, but like we said, these are tools that are not even tools. They use us truly, because they are capitalist tools used for advertising, used for corporations. You know, they mine our information, they mine all the labor that we put out onto them. But they're designed, again, to ensure that you're constantly seeking that external validation, right? That we have been working so hard to not do. And so really, in order to keep your intention of the good, of being able to share a message that's meaningful, that is purposeful, that hopefully brings about spiritual change for individuals, but also social change, because I believe that these platforms can be used that way. I've seen it.
And I believe that those two things are intertwined. They're not separate.
Yes, absolutely. Very much so. But it is this constant recognition of, I need to show up and share this regardless of who sees it, regardless of what kind of validation it receives. You know, you have to block the followers, the likes, the vanity metrics of the space. It has to be taken out of the equation, because, for example, Lara, the work that you're doing is inherently spiritual. You know, you are really getting at the core of who people are, the sharing of the essence, the vulnerability. And this is a space that is not conducive to vulnerability. You know, it's a space where we show this,
the mask.
It's a performance, right? It's theatrics. It's showing the best of us at all times. Even in the showings of vulnerability, it's often, you know, done with this, I need people to see me a certain way. It's very constructed. So it really takes that constant awareness and self-reflection. And the second you see, for example, if you share something and it doesn't give you that feedback, you're not getting that positive feedback, and that causes a discomfort within you, and, you know, makes you feel really shitty about yourself. That's a sign of, okay, you know, I need to reevaluate why that is. You know, why do I require a like to tell me that this work is worthy and valuable? You know, when the truth is, if you are following and if you're following that true purpose within you, if you're aligned with why you think you're here on this planet, and, you know, this message that you're sharing, none of that matters. None of it matters.
So with your Instagram page, which you started right after George Floyd, right?
Shortly before I had started, you know, a couple of my poems that were sort of all, I was just like, let me just put these out there. but definitely after the murder of George Floyd, I thought, I have spent my entire educational career, I've spent my entire career up until that point from this social justice perspective. I had always sought social, political, economic justice, racial justice. And here I was, worrying about myself and, wrapped up in my, the sense of who am I? What am I supposed to be doing? And that happened. And it was sort of like, I had such a rage.
It was a clarifying moment.
Clarifying.
And yeah.
Of and where so, I was like, I can't sit in my pity in myself anymore. I have this voice, regardless of what it, I had no idea of what that would mean, sharing my work, but I felt that voice of, this is what you have to do. And that was that.
And so over the last, I guess, is it 14 months, 15 months, something that you've had your page and you've seen the growth. Yeah. Can you reflect a little bit on how, on any feelings that came up or anything that any learnings or lessons that you realized for yourself, or even how, as your followers grew, did you feel, I don't know, a sense of pressure to like put out content or anything? Like, I'm just really interested in understanding how you have navigated this, because
yes,
I think it helps us as creators, but also as humans, because it's whether it's a social media page or whether it's something else that we identify, that becomes part of our identity. I'm a gymnast, I'm a musician, I'm, a straight A student or whatever, right? We all have these things that become part of our identity, and now this is part of your identity, and I'm just interested in your rumbling with it.
Yeah, it's very challenging, and it can be a very taxing experience, because on the one hand, it requires a lot of emotional and intellectual labor to create. We know this, and especially, with the topics that I write about, they are very personal to me. I'm extremely emotionally invested. It does require a lot of intellectual labor to wrestle with these topics to begin with. So there's that aspect of,
and then also wrestling with the topic, but then also you have to put in the intellectual labor of how do I break down that topic and make it relatable and understandable in a small space, right? Where I don't have the hour to explain something. I'm doing it in 1 slide or 4 slides or whatever, right?
Yes. And that's the thing too. I think when I started speaking directly on issues about anti-Blackness, about race, about how these played out in our society, what our roles were in addressing these injustices, I did start out with this idea of like, okay, I'm speaking to an audience. And so I'm catering to an audience, because I think my first post in this along this line was directed to, white folks, and how do they, what is their job at this juncture? What were they supposed to do? What was their responsibility as a woman of color? Sharing that with them. And I really recognized over time, as things started to change, I started less this idea of writing for an audience, and more so being called to, or at least, it was really for people of color, for Black, Indigenous, women of color, people of color, for our learning, our understanding about how to navigate these systems. What did that mean for us? How do we empower ourselves, reclaim and decolonize our internalized oppression? And I found my way as I navigated through, but it's such a struggle, because did I feel the pressure to create content? Absolutely. But again, it was that voice of, you have to keep up with this, this algorithm. You have to keep up with others that are also doing this work. Again, those voices come in of, the same things, same metrics of achievement that we apply to our jobs applied here, and it really took a lot for me.
Was there an upsurge of growth, like in that period, June, July, 2020?
I think in the time of, post George Floyd's murder, we saw on social media a huge influx of anti-racist educators, of people that were scrambling to, not only share their labor, but from like an audience perspective, like really like extract the labor of, women and people of color in particular. But it was very interesting to see, because I don't think that was ever really experienced before, to the same degree. And so of course, the things that we were talking about were topical at the time, and that attracts an audience. There was definitely an exodus of many people after this became not trendy anymore.
Oh wow, so you could see that too.
Which is interesting as well, right? Like after the infamous everyone posting the black squares, it was definitely a performance of, I need to prove that I'm not one of those people. I'm not a racist. I'm not a bigot. I'm not sexist in any way. All of these isms, that we were fighting against, and it's still that's still there to a great extent. I think that's what's been a big turnoff for me, and an awakening point over the last year and a bit, or however long I've been in that space, of realizing that if this is meaningful, spiritual, deeply emotional work and transformation that I am going through, and also wanting to share with others, it's never about the numbers, because you will see that because yes, these accounts that have so many followers, are these people really engaged in this work? Are they there for, just the optics of, following who they think is an expert on these certain topics? But you'll see even the engagement on certain posts. Like a person can have like 50,000 followers, but their engagement is obviously not high. It's all about, are you looking for quantity, or are you looking for quality of actual connection? And this is very human stuff that we're talking about. You want connection, you want depth. It means nothing to me to have this platform with all these followers if the message isn't resonating, or the message isn't actually received, reflected on. There's no dialogue between us. And so it really became about, okay, how can I make relationships with people in this space? Is that possible to make relationships in a virtual space? And of course, we were dealing with the pandemic, which forced a lot of us to be in a virtual space and connecting with one another. And like, we are a testament to that, like our relationship and our ability to connect, that yes, you can have meaningful relationships, but you have to be looking for the right things. And again, your intentions have to mirror what it is you're looking for.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for kind of explaining your own wrestling with this, because I think that it will help so many people.
And it's constant. It's a constant battle.
It's not that you've done it, it's in a box, okay, you're good now. It's constant. And sometimes it comes up. I find if I'm feeling shitty about something else, then it just spills over, that feeling, into other areas, right? And it kind of pollutes other areas. And so I now, because I'm more aware of myself, which is, again, I've been building that self-awareness over the last 3 years, I can spot it and I can know that that's what's happening. And then I can be sort of more proactive if I feel the energy to be proactive with myself, or I can be, if I'm exhausted or depleted, I can be like, okay, I see what that's doing. I can see it's making me feel like this. I don't feel like kind of deconstructing right now, but I'm going to park it. I know it's there and I know it's not real, and I'm going to park it,
Yes. And sorry, Lara, just to jump in there too, in those moments of exhaustion and depletion, I take frequent breaks from the internet space. There will be times where I have now gotten to that point, because what people don't realize also is social media is an energy portal.
Yes.
You're in that space. It's not like you're interacting with the screen. There's an exchange of energy that is happening.
Yes.
By the things that you consume, the things you look at, the images, the things you read. And so you can, if you are feeling at any point very negative and very depleted, that is a sign from your inner self saying that this is not, whatever you're consuming, or your approach of being in that space is not in alignment with who you are and what's good for you. Yeah. So I take breaks, and I have stopped feeling this need to constantly produce content. That is our ingrained capitalism saying that we need to keep producing, keep working in order for people not to forget us. There's these feelings that will come, that voice will come in of like, oh, but if I'm not on there and I'm not posting content, I'm not creating content, people will leave and they'll forget about me. And that there's that insecurity that comes in. And I had to sit with myself and say, those are not the people that you're meant to connect with. The people that are you.
Sorry.
Yes. No, go on.
And also with creativity, to have creativity, you have to have rest and fallow periods. You have to.
Absolutely.
That's the essence of it.
Especially for meaningful, to create something meaningful. Like, are you creating for the sake of just filling up space?
Yes.
Which is what a lot of, unfortunately, I think a lot of us end up, falling into that trap because, we just want to be relevant. And we're constantly just trying to keep up with
and
that.
Trying to game the algorithm as well. Like that, there are all these people that are social media experts and everything, and I've always shied away from that because yeah,
that's important too. Exactly that, because yes, you can follow what the experts say. You can beat the algorithm, fight the algorithm, and grow a following. Will it be a meaningful following for you? Will it?
And what will it do to you?
What will it do to you, and what is lost, and is the purpose, again, the intention for which you entered the space being served? And again, I don't believe that's the case, because I feel like it's a distraction. When you are focusing again on the external validation, you are, you only have a certain reserve of energy. So is that going towards creating a meaning, something meaningful to share? And so I choose to constantly reevaluate and say, no, I'm going to take a break. I don't feel that creative urge right now. That means that's okay. And when I feel the need to share a message, I keep reminding myself that the message will always reach whom it's meant to,
at the exact right time.
At the exact right time, regardless of the algorithm, regardless of who you attract to your space. I do believe in a power greater than the algorithm. I believe that people are brought together when they're meant to be together. And it's just trusting in yourself and trusting in the integrity of your message and what you're trying to share, that I think is so important.
That's such a beautiful way to bring part one to a close.
I'm so glad.
Focusing on the intention, really being clear on your intention and challenging yourself at all times about the intention, like coming back to that, because that's the foundation, but also trusting that in the same way that you find things at the exact right time in your life, and it feels like synchronicity and magic, other people who are meant to find or hear the thing that you're saying or have written at the exact time will find it. So that is really beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm gonna bring part one to a close, and we're gonna be back in part two. And so thank you very much, everybody, and we will see you in part two. Thank you, Sameen.
Yeah, see you.